Hello, this is Ronald Allen with Managing Change through Effective Communications. Today's discussion is be careful of the phrases you use. Choose your phrases carefully. Why do I say that? Well, I'm sure in many of your communications and conversations with other people, you might use a commonly used phrase or a phrase that you're comfortable with, not being acutely aware of a miscommunication or an opportunity where an individual receives it in an unfavorable manner. And I'm going to throw you right into the deep end. You know, I always like to give you the stake right up front. A lot of the behavior of coaches and trainers, etc., and facilitators is to kind of work you up to a crescendo or engage you in a series of small steps before they throw the whammy on you. Even when I had the program, My House, Your House, when I was doing mortgage banking, I would always throw the stake out first because people don't have a lot of time. And with that, let's continue. So the book I'm kind of reading from is way back in the 70s, and yet the fundamentals of interpersonal communication by Kim Giffen and Bobby Patton are more relevant today because of artificial intelligence, because of aggregating people's behaviors, and how quickly we are to snap, move on. Our minds are constantly seeking out new information. I like to think of ourselves, our community, as arresting the moment, right? Pulling back a second, taking a little bit longer to make sure you've heard, understand, and the other person is in sync with you so that you both walk away with mutually accepted outcomes, beneficial outcomes. What's even more important of that, extrapolation from that, is I want to work with you again. I feel comfortable. I trust you. So communication is a lot more than the spoken word, a lot more than the immediate outcome that we derive. It is the marathon of how we strategically, I've used that word before, and certainly the gambits we use in our conversation. So I'm going to throw these phrases at you, and you tell me if they strike a chord, if you've used them, if you've heard them, and the meaning the other person was subscribing to them was not the same that you heard or thought they meant, or even the conversation was going in the direction. So, let's see, here we go. This is a story of an individual who walks into a plumber's shop after seeing a poster reading plumber's window struck or reading iron sinks, S-I-N-K-S. I'm just going to close the window here because we have some neighbors taking care of some business and you might hear the background. So here is the individual walking down the road and they see this sign and it says iron sinks. So he goes in and he tells the storekeeper, I know iron sinks. So the storekeeper's a little sharp and he knows that this guy's kind of playing with him, and so he takes it to the next level. So he says, yes, you are correct. And sulfur springs, jam rolls, music stands, Niagara Falls, concrete walks, wood fences, sheep run, holiday trips, rubber tires, the organ stops. Now I went through all of them on purpose so that you'd get a real feeling and a broad sense of these common phrases that people use. And it doesn't matter what nationality you are. Every nationality, every culture has them, and they use them very flippantly. They use them as if everybody's supposed to know. Everybody's supposed to understand. So just by way of any little replies here, just let me know if you've heard these phrases and say, yes, misunderstood, and then if you can give it an example. If there's one that I haven't mentioned, that would be really cool. And the reason for that is, in my own studies and research, you can continue to study no matter what the age. You know, people say to me, well, why do you keep doing this? Because information, learning, intelligence, growth, development knows no age. And the age we're going in, where systems, machinery, technology, software, code, that's what's driving it, is changing the way we communicate. So it's even more crucial that we begin to understand, not just to be brief or short or specific, it is to engage the other person. And if we're using phrases like that, like those, and they're misinterpreted, we miss the opportunity for the long-term gain, the marathon benefit of even getting involved. You know the old joke, two people come together in a networking session. One person says they're a nuclear physicist, the other one says they're a realtor. They look at each other for like 10 seconds and almost instinctively, unspoken, intuitively, they make their way to the coffee and the donut table to seek relief. And that's what happens a lot of times in our communications. We see people, we make an assumption, we have a perception, and we cut off or limit the engagement. So some of the work that I've been doing, here is one by Robert Cialdini, The Psychology of Persuasion. So think for a minute. Here we have these phrases that we use, right? Concrete walks. In New Jersey, we have the Parkway, which it literally is. Take your car up into the Parkway, park it, especially in the summer. Other cultures may not be familiar with that. Other nationality, other people, just people in the neighborhood. I've been using the phrase chutskis, for example. And I thought it was an American term. It seems to be an American New York term, and only from a smaller group, and yet from a smaller group of people in New York that understand chutskis are nothing more than novelty items. In fact, let me show you my chutski table. Let's see if I can show you this, if it's up there. That's my chutski table, right at the top. Those are things that I've collected over time. Those are things that I have an endearment to. When I was in Indianapolis with the Brickyard, with the racing, I went into the museum and got all these little toys and little information, some seals and emblems. The Nutcracker Suite, one of my favorite pieces of classical music. It has a lot of meaning for me. My wife actually bought it for me. When our nieces and nephews graduated, you yourself may have these things. Well, in language, that meaning has to be discovered between two parties. That requirement, and by the way, in taking the 60 seconds, God forbid we take any more, maybe it's not so much the God part, it endears the other person. Another good piece of information, you know Malcolm Gladwell, many people may know Malcolm Gladwell. The tipping point, how little things can make a big difference. It's not just the thank you card, it's the thank you card that you actually created, and I'm doing one right now myself. It's the free subscription, and I'm going to be a little obvious here, to the Managing Change newsreel. It's a free subscription. I've been doing it for 3 years. Got about 300 people. I don't push it too hard. It's a curated group of stories, articles that talk about not only what's happening today, what is happening into the future, and how our lives are being impacted, how we communicate with one another, how we will be communicating even within our own homes. So when we talk about choosing your phrases carefully, it's a much broader understanding and address of not just words, how we think, what meaning we've subscribed to these phrases. And when you go out there and you find a disconnect, you find someone who's kind of winces a moment or doesn't particularly understand, it is your due diligence, there you go, and let's use a legal term, a financial term, to clarify what's going on in the conversation between the parties, all the parties, whether it's two or more. In project management, when I work with project managers, they're constantly talking about the lack of understanding between the other party, or the intent, you've heard me say that, the impression. We always fall back to contracts, which means litigation. Not a good place to be. Not a good place for long-term relationships. And that's why I marry the personal with the business world, because to me, there's no difference. And ironically, here's a little tip that many do not know, personal. When my wife and I got together some 20 plus years ago, about a year afterwards, maybe 9 months, I'm not sure now, memory fades, she said to me, "You're the same whether you're wearing a suit or doing the gardening." And I said, "I guess you can always dry clean the suit if you happen to be doing gardening with the suit." So these phrases are important, the ones you use. And you notice I'm not going to dwell on the phrases. I want you to think for yourself. How am I speaking to someone? What am I trying to achieve? How do I engage them? How do I get them to share, to want to use their intellectual capital? How about that for a perspective? Instead of saying, this is what I want, this is the outcome we need, especially in business, what if you said, how can I get that other person to use their knowledge, skills, methodologies to support what we're trying to do? So it's 1 and 1 does equal 3. In fact, in this case, it's 1 and 1 might even equal 5, because now you've got multiple thinking, a culture, collaborative approach to engaging other people. So it goes a lot broader, and I like to think of that because we're dealing with people from many different perspectives, in experiences, levels of knowledge, right? The language we use, these phrases really do dictate where we're coming from, and most importantly, where we are right now. Think about it. Someone says a phrase to you which is, let's say, dated. Is that where their mind is? Is that where they're comfortable? And if they are, how do you then connect with that, right? Are you asking for clarity? Oh, by the way, where did that come from? You know, we have a phrase in England we used to say, and it was, a frog went a-courting, a frog went a-courting, and he did ride. And I never understood where it came from, but I understand it. In other words, a male frog is going to try and find a female mate. And he did ride, he rode aggressively, or another interpretation, he was strategic in his approach, right? So I can't say that to the average person here in the States, although I did meet a gentleman from Newcastle the other day on a project, and we just had a ripped conversation. Now, notice I use the word ripped. Where did that come from? To me, it just means a great conversation. So these little nuances, they enrich your conversation. They enlighten the other person. They intrigue the other person, right? And that's what conversation is really all about, especially in business. Get your mates, your associates, your colleagues, those who you're managing, and those upline to be intrigued. And now, I will say this. I will have to say this. Sometimes you're going to find yourself out there on the pier by yourself. And the wind is coming in at like 95 miles an hour. Because some people just don't get it. They dumb themselves down. John Gatto, a teacher in New York for 25 years, I believe he recently passed. He has been very ill. Wrote the book, Dumbing Down Our Children. It's a shame when this is the richest form of communication. Yes, we know 80-85% of our communication is nonverbal. Once you open your mouth, once you start using words in a discovery manner, a learning, probing manner, you're telling the other person and you're showing the other person you care. This is Ronald Allen, managing change through effective communications. You know where to find me.